I made the executive decision that was. Right?
Come on.
Try to bunch together.
Cordial, good morning. Our gathering this morning is to pay respect to the victims of the Ballymurphy Massacre and to seek truth and justice for their families. Between August 9th and 11th of 1971, 11 innocent Irish people were murdered in cold blood by the British Army Parachute Regiment, the same regiment responsible for the murders in Derry on Bloody Sunday. The time has come now for the British to take responsibility for the massacre in Ballymurphy. I'd just like to say it's very important that we leave here and remember that we have to sign petitions and letters to Teresa Villers and David Cameron, representatives of the British government. 43 years is far too long for this to sit. 43 years, innocent people ignored. The truth must come out, and we are the people to do it. We have t-shirts here, there's a table behind, and hopefully everyone will help out as far as that's concerned. I'd like to thank Division 39's Color Guard for coming out, the Emerald Society Pipe Band, and I'd like to welcome you all. Deacon Paul McBlain will now come up and do a blessing.
Almighty Father, time and again in your relationship with man, you have said that freedom and justice is the right and the reward for all who place their faith in you. This morning we gathered to seek justice for those who were murdered in August 1971 in the Ballymurphy section of Belfast. The events in Ballymurphy are little known to most people who support justice for Ireland. Lord, the victims and their families have never received public recognition or legal redress for these horrific actions. The people of Ballymurphy, Ireland, and the world seek a full, independent, international investigation by the British government and a statement of innocence be issued when the murdered victims are exonerated. We stand here today united with the families and residents of Ballymurphy, asking your intervention, that you may touch the hearts of all involved, that they may see that it is your will that justice be done. And we ask this prayer through our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
I'd like to welcome One Shot Patty, fine musicians from Ireland, a.k.a. Jerry Gormley and Mike McDade, to play a tune for us.
This is the part where you all get up and jump around. victory swung the noble harbitrary, by the vengeful tyrants stricken in their blue. While they had him face to face, by the courage of the race, oh, they went their souls undaunted to their doom. Well, God save Ireland, said the heroes. God save Ireland, said the all. Oh, whether on that scaffold high or the battlefield will die, oh, no matter when for Ireland dear will fall. Climbing up the ragged stairs, rang the voices loud with prayer, the thing's fatal cord around the casks. Oh, beside the yellow trees, kissed like brothers lovingly, true to home and faith, freedom to the last. Well, we sing God save Ireland, said the heroes. God save Ireland, said the all. Oh, whether on that scaffold's high or the battlefield will die, oh, no matter when for Ireland dear will fall. Never till the latest day shall the memories pass away, those gallant lives thus given for our lands. Oh, but on our cause must go, amidst joy and weal and woe, for to make our land a nation free and grand. God save Ireland, said the heroes. God save Ireland, said the all. Oh, whether on that scaffold's high or the battlefield will die, oh, no matter when for Ireland dear will fall. Well, God save Ireland, said our heroes. God save Ireland, said the all. Oh, whether on that scaffold's high or that battlefield will die, oh, no matter when for Ireland dear will fall. Oh, no matter when for Ireland dear will fall.
That was Gary Gormley and Mike McDade, otherwise known as One Shot Patty. Excellent job. I'd now like to introduce Anya Fox from the Belfast area, who's going to read a letter from the families.
Dear friends in Philadelphia, the Ballymurphy Massacre families would like to thank each and every one of you for coming out today in solidarity with us and for your ongoing support in our campaign for truth and justice. This weekend marks the anniversaries of 11 innocent civilians murdered by members of the British Parachute Regiment. Today is the 43rd anniversary of the death of Eddie Doherty. Eddie had visited his elderly parents in Turf Lodge area of West Belfast on the evening of Tuesday the 10th of August 1971 to check on their safety during the ongoing unrest. He was making his way home and stopped at a barricade which had been erected by local people in an attempt to restrict access by the British Army. At the same time, a British Saracen moved in to dismantle the barricade. From a digger, a soldier from the Parachute Regiment opened fire. Eddie was fatally shot in the back. Eddie married his childhood sweetheart Mary in 1962 and they had 4 children, Eamon, Patrick, Kieran and Brenda. Eddie lived for his family and did everything he could to make them happy. The day he was murdered, the life and soul was taken out of his family and their lives were torn apart. Eddie's wife Mary died within 10 years, leaving their children orphaned, and his mother Elizabeth couldn't cope and died of a broken heart. This story is the same for all the other families too. 57 children were left without a parent, and family members died prematurely as a result of the stress and trauma of losing a loved one. Many are still living with the psychological scars from the events that happened 43 years ago. We are ordinary families who have come together to clear our loved ones' names and have them declared innocent. Eddie was one of 11 civilians murdered over 3 days in August 1971. They are Eddie Doherty, Father Hugh Mullen, Frank Quinn, Joan Connolly, Joseph Murphy, Danny Taggart, Noel Phillips, John Laverty, Joseph Core, John McCarr and Paddy McCarthy. Their lives were brutally taken by the infamous British Parachute Regiment. These killers didn't only murder our loved ones, but they tried to blacken their names. About a year and a half ago, as part of our campaign, the families, with the help of our solicitor Paddy Murray, put a proposal to the British and Irish governments. It was the Ballymurphy Independent Panel, a proposal based on the Hillsborough Panel, which would examine the causes, context and circumstances of what happened to our loved ones. We suggested that the panel be made up of people who were known to both governments, such as Professor Phil Scranton, who wrote the book on the Hillsborough tragedy and was a member of the Hillsborough panel, and Baroness Nuala O'Lone, who was the first police ombudsman for the North. The panel proposal is a tried and tested cost-effective model which has previously been supported by the British government. We gave our proposals to the British Secretary of State for the North, Theresa Villiers, and the Irish government. In the meantime, the proposals were supported by Sinn Féin, the SDLP, Alliance Party, numerous MPs and TDs, and also by Father Tim Bartlett on behalf of the Catholic Church. On the 30th of January this year, our campaign was given a huge boost when the panel proposal was fully endorsed by Taoiseach Enda Kelly and the Irish government. It was a great day for all the families, but it was short-lived. At the end of April, the families were called to the Solicitor's office to hear the decision by the British Secretary of State for the North of Ireland, Theresa Villiers. It was sent to us by a courier. Miss Villiers hadn't even the decency to tell us herself. In the letter, she said she understood our pain and our hurt, but she could not agree to set up an independent panel because it was not in the public interest. How dare she? We think that the murder of 11 innocent civilians in a small estate in West Belfast is very much in the public interest. We think 57 children lost a parent is very much in the public interest. Our families over the years have campaigned in a determined and dignified manner. We have sought only the truth for our dead. All the way we have come up against barriers, stalling tactics, hindrances and hurdles. The British government has treated us with contempt, and shame on them. We, the Ballymurphy families, have a message for Prime Minister David Cameron and his sidekick Villiers and their Tory-led government. We, the families, will not be treated as second-class citizens. We will not be silenced. We will not go away. We will be here to see our loved ones declared innocent. We will be here when we get the truth and justice of our loved ones truly deserve. We will continue to shame the British government's hypocritical policies near and far, with the help and support of groups in Philadelphia, Washington, New York, Canada, Donegal, Dublin, Melbourne, and as promised, at your front door in London later this year. Free the truth and free it now. Again, we can't help thank our friends in Philadelphia enough. Your support and passion has been second to none. Thank you, the Ballymurphy families.
Thanks to the people in Belfast who have gone through so much suffering. At this point, I'd like to bring up Chris Connolly from Delaware County, who's going to give us a brief history of Ballymurphy.
At 3:40 a.m. on the 9th of August, 1971, the British Army commenced Operation Demetrius, a sweep of Republican and nationalist neighborhoods in order to carry out internment without trial. The stated goal of this mission: shock and stun the civilian population. In the Ballymurphy neighborhood of West Belfast, the Parachute Regiment would carry out those orders to an atrocious accuracy as they murdered 11 innocent civilians over the course of 3 August days. Operation Demetrius, in all its iron-fisted heaviness, led to riots and mayhem in the streets and estates across the north of Ireland, and Ballymurphy in particular. Men and women were torn violently from their houses, and the buildings themselves were ransacked. The scene was chaos, greeted by the familiar din of the bin lids, only to be pierced by what would become the all-too-common sound of gunshots. The 11 innocent victims of the Ballymurphy Massacre were altruistic souls looking to protect their families. from sons and brothers looking to shepherd frail neighbors to safety from house raids, siblings looking to check on their loved ones, mothers and fathers out to search frantically for their children in the noise and the violence and the confusion, a spiritual father looking to guard the flock that was his greater neighborhood, an English Quaker community member out to look for the adopted family he'd formed through his efforts to organize a rec center, and a carpenter working on the door of a local church. These men and women were brought out onto the streets as humanitarians, and they were gunned down in cold blood. 57 children were left without a parent. For the surviving families, insult was added to injury in the form of slander and stigmatism when their loved ones, each of whom was unarmed, were labeled gunmen, gunwomen, and petrol bombers. They were ostracized by the loyalist community and Protestant neighbors, one family being driven out of a mixed neighborhood. For having the audacity to challenge these untruths, their houses were subject to repeated retaliatory raids, damaging both psychologically and ongoing physical damage to property. They were also cast pointedly into poverty because these false accusations precluded them from any survivor benefits. The clusters of the deaths demonstrate the humanitarian nature of all of the 11 deaths on the street that night. Father Hugh Mullen, gunned down at the side of a wounded man in Springfield Park. Frank Quinn, gunned down when he rushed to Father Mullen's aid. A crowd fired into indiscriminately outside the Henry Taggart barracks. Noel Phillips lying on the ground, calling for his mother as he died. Joan Connolly, a mother of 8, giving over to her caretaker tendencies, shot as she tried to care for Noel. Her autopsy demonstrated that she bled to death because of the lack of medical attention. Danny Taggart was shot in the back, running across the field known as the Manse. Eyewitness reports that his body leapt off the ground as each subsequent shot hit him for a total of 14 shots. Joseph Josie Murphy was shot in the Manse as well. He survived in the hospital until August 22nd, when he died from complications from having been denied immediate medical care after he was dragged, wounded, back to the barracks where he was kicked and beaten, and the paras fired a rubber bullet into his open wound. Eddie Doherty passed a barricade when a paratrooper sniper started to respond to a petrol bomb. He was shot in the back, but they managed to slander him by claiming that he threw the bomb, despite unanimous and immediate eyewitness accounts to the contrary. Joseph Poor and John Laverty, a father and a young man, were part of a crowd at the bottom of the Upper White Rock Road, surveying the assault on their neighborhood. No definitive account of their killings has yet to come out. Eileen Poor took her husband's case to court twice. She received no justice either time, but a judge's query of the conflicting testimony speaks volumes in its pointedness. If Joe Coor was a gunman, then why was he shot in the back? Patty McCarthy was delivering milk and bread that he'd stockpiled as the local community worker to mothers who couldn't leave their house in the overpowering chaos. A gun was placed into his mouth by the paras, who performed a mock execution. He suffered a heart attack and died. John McCurr was picked off by a paratrooper sniper despite clearly being a construction worker working on the local church door. The paras tried to drag his body away, only to be stopped by local women who had had enough of the previous 10 murders. When the paras finally relented to let through the ambulance, it was too late for John. He never regained consciousness. The same system that permitted this slaughter continues to conspire against an emergence of the truth about the Ballymurphy Massacre, still seeks to prevent those who campaign vigorously from ever achieving justice for the 11 poor souls lost. It's important to remind all congregated here that this is the very same parachute regiment who committed the Bloody Sunday Massacre 6 months later, directly enabled to carry out this further atrocity because they were never called to account and their actions covered up in Ballymurphy. And as we gather here 43 years later, there still has not been a comprehensive criminal investigation into these actions. Therefore, we stand here in solidarity with the families of those slain, demanding that the truth be heard.
Thank you, Chris. That was truly a heartfelt testimony. Chilling. Once again, One Shot Patty, make sure you give them a good round of applause. They deserve it.
I was born in the Dublin streets where the loyalists tongue the beats. Thus hateful English speak, they walked all over us. And every single night when we dad would come home tight, we would invite the neighbours outside with this chorus. Come out, you blackened tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wives how you won medals down in Flanders. Tell her how the IRA were made to run like hell away from the green and the lovely lanes of Shillashan. Come, let us hear you still, them old elves to right soon as they had spears and bow and arrows. How bravely you faced one with your 16-pounder gun, and you frightened the down natives till tomorrow. Come out, you blackened tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders. Tell her how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and the lovely lanes of Shillashan. Let us hear you tell how you stand the grip and hell, how you fought some men until he persecuted. Where are the sneers and jeers that you loudly let us hear as our leaders of 16 were executed? Come out, you blackened tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders, and tell her how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and the lovely lanes of Shillashan. Come out, you blackened tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders. Tell her how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and the lovely lanes of Shillashan. The green and the lovely lanes of Shillashan. Green and the
This time I'd like to introduce our main speaker, Sean Pender, National Director of the AOH, National Chair of Freedom for All Ireland. I have to say, I've known Sean for a number of years. No one works harder for truth and justice than Sean. He's as well known with Relatives for Justice and the Pat Finucane Center as he is here in Philadelphia with us. I know that he will have a detailed insight into what goes on. He always does. Once again, Sean Pender.
Thank you, Pierce. Thank you, Bob, for the invitation to come to this very special event in the shadow of one of the finest sculptures that you'll ever see, talking about the Angkor Moor, the Great Hunger. It's unfortunate that the policy of the English government from the 1840s continues to this day. It took them over 150 years to admit to their role in Angkor Moor, and we still wait today to admit their role in so many more events. You know, it was over 7 years ago that I first met the Ballymurphy families at an event in Pilots Row in Derry that was organized by Relatives for Justice, the Belfast-based organization that the AOH and LAOH is proud to support. On that cold, dreary January day, I was moved by the story that I heard. I sat with dozens of others as we listened, as loved ones and witnesses told us of the horrific events of August 9th, 10th, and 11th of 1971. Since that day, and despite the hard work of the families and supporters of the Ballymurphy Families Justice Campaign, we are sadly no closer to justice than we were then. That's why events like this are so important. Those that lost loved ones in Ballymurphy and in so many other areas in the North deserve the truth, but sadly, they have had to deal with the official government policy of denial, delay, and obstruction when it comes to dealing with the past. As I was preparing for today's events, I came across the presentation that I initially saw in Derry several years ago. The closing comments delivered that day by Relatives for Justice co-director Andre Murphy regarding the Ballymurphy campaign still resonate, and I'd like to share them with you now. Andre concluded her presentation by saying, "The story is not complete without the story of all state killings and the role of the British state with loyalists through its policy of collusion. But the truth is that story will never be complete without the acknowledgement from the British government of their role in the conflict. British soldiers killed with impunity. They covered it up, and they did it again. And they have never admitted responsibility and were not amenable through their own courts. This is a legacy for which they refuse either here or in international courts to be held accountable. They fear the truth. They refuse to cooperate with independent inquiries, and they try to pass off the debate about how to deal with the past with half-hearted initiatives. They support the hierarchy of victimhood, with preferential treatment handed consistently to members of the so-called security forces families, with little or no regard at all to the families of those whom these same forces killed. These families, who with dignity have requested nothing other than truth and acknowledgement. The current government refuses to work with victims of the conflict to address the legacy of our conflict, all of our hurts and pains, no matter who is responsible or where they came from. Truth costs nothing. Acknowledgement costs nothing. Historical clarification costs nothing. All the actors must be involved in the process of dealing with the past, but the British government must take its responsibility as the sovereign government seriously. It has proven it cannot be trusted on the issue. It must now move with the Irish government towards an independent and international truth commission which will deliver for all families. But for the families we have learned of today, and for the families bereaved in the wake of internment in Ballymurphy area, it must acknowledge fully what was responsible for it, the killings and effects on the families, and it must begin with an apology for what it did and the lies and cover-up which followed. That would be a beginning, and the truth must follow. Spoken over 7 years ago, but still so true today. So today, I have no doubt that the British government continues to think that it can wait out these bothersome campaigns, and sooner or later, they'll be forgotten about. But what they fail to realize is in that 43 years since their soldiers killed 11 innocent citizens, is that the families, and we that support the families, will not rest until there is truth and justice for their loved ones. Grandchildren of those that were murdered are now pursuing the cause of justice for grandparents they never knew. Because despite the passage of time, there is one thing that we have that the British government will never have, and that is the truth. The truth does not change from day to day or generation to generation, and it is why we will one day be successful. So today, here in Philadelphia, we must recommit ourselves to seek justice for the